Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. We are quickly approaching the June 24th Democratic primary for New York City, and the race is heating up. Candidate forums are happening all around the 5 boroughs. Some are getting pretty intense. The polls are consistently showing one candidate, Andrew Cuomo, with a clear lead, usually pulling in just over a third of the vote, but that is still far from a majority. The number of undecided voters is doing surprisingly well at about 22%, while the rest of the field, which is about 8 candidates, they're all trying to break through and gain attention and raise money and ultimately win. One of those candidates is Scott Stringer, born and raised in New York. He is a former state assembly member, former Manhattan borough president, and former city controller. He's pitching himself as a proven reformer, somebody who puts people over politics, and will fight for New York. His campaign website highlights milestones from his public service, including protecting Mitchell Lama tenants as a community organizer and working to end corrupt practices in the assembly, championing affordable housing and government accountability as borough president, and rooting out waste and saving taxpayers billions as controller. Scott Stringer, of course, ran for mayor in the crowded 2021 Democratic primary, earning key endorsements from the powerful United Federation of Teachers and the Progressive Working Families Party. But that campaign was upended by allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct, charges that he has denied and, in fact, has countersued for libel, one of the accusers. Now he is back with a renewed focus on experience and leadership and a vision for the city's future, and he joins us now to make his case to voters. Great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Errol, it's great to be on the podcast.
Let me start with this. What happened in the last 4 years, I'm sure you've done this, that you would have prevented? What do you see on the screen? What do you see happening in the city where you say, you know what, if I were mayor, this either wouldn't have happened or I would have squelched it within a week or two?
Great way to begin. Eric Adams would be running unopposed for re-election if I was city controller. I never would have allowed this corruption to fester for more than a month. I would have used subpoena power. I would have employed my investigative unit. I would have upended the pay-to-play. The truth of the matter is he got in trouble in part because government oversight allowed him to be in trouble. And as a result, he's not going to be the mayor. But look, my successor and others sleptwalked through the first couple of years of this. That's just a fact. Doesn't mean you're not qualified to be mayor, but let's face it, a Stringer controller moment, I mean, the world would have been in a different place.
Well, yeah, say more. I don't think of the controller's office as having a lot of investigatory power. I mean, you can poke around in the books, you can ask a lot of questions, you can publish audits, including damning audits, including performance audits about how agencies are doing. But how would you have used those tools?
First of all, you're right about the audits. So audits can take as long as 18 months. There's a set of rules and, a set of rules going forward that you have to deploy in order to get findings and make the audits credible. But I also established an investigative unit, trained auditors who had investigative experience to go in and look at some of the deals of the previous administration, worked with law enforcement on the Rivington scandal, sued the mayor, in this case Mayor de Blasio, when he would withhold emergency contracts long after COVID, took on waste, fraud, and corruption, and was very aggressive aligning our policy work and our investigative work and our audits to make real change. If you look at the audits on homeless shelters, for example, these were dangerous situations that kids in shelters were facing as well as individuals. We blew that up and exposed it. There's audit after audit, just holding the administration accountable. The best compliment I ever got was from a former city commissioner who said, given a choice between the Department of Investigation and arriving at my doorstep or the controller's office, I'll take DOI any day of the week. And part of what that was about was not really about me. It was really about my ability to attract the best and the brightest and rebuild and rebrand the controller's office, which is exactly my goal as the next mayor.
The implication here is that your successor, Brad Lander, the current controller, who is also running for mayor, has not used the office in the best way and maybe let the Adams administration get away with stuff that he shouldn't have?
I think it was a sleepy office, but not poorly motivated. I think he misjudged what the role of comptroller is, which is less about being cooperative and more about having strong oversight and being tough as nails. And that's what we need in the next mayor. And look, my experience is real and wide. I've served in the state legislature, worked with Democrats, but also had to navigate Republicans in the state Senate. As Manhattan Borough President, we basically invented community-based planning, put an urban planner on every community board, listened to the needs of neighborhoods, but also built out 3 university expansions that were controversial but necessary to attract people from all over the world to our city. I reformed the community boards, went to a merit-based selection process, got rid of all the gamemanship, in terms of political appointees. And as comptroller, Errol, we did major work, not just our audits, our investigations of the de Blasio administration, but we also tackled the inequality issues related to MWBEs. We could talk about that. And we also looked at how we could manage a pension fund successfully and also divest $4 billion from fossil fuel, divest from gun manufacturers, divest from private prisons. We did this working with our trustees. We consolidated the 5 pension funds, which never, ever happened. And I didn't do it legislatively. I got all the labor union trustees to work with me and agree to one investment meeting. That all fell apart after I left. But it was a great 8 years that prepared me for this moment.
Unlike a lot of other people, including some of your rivals, you don't go around disavowing or denigrating the profession of public service, right? I hear all the time people saying, I'm not a career politician. I'm not a career politician. I'm thinking, when I go to the dentist, I'm looking for somebody who's like kind of a career dentist who spent many hours working on this stuff. You happen to be one of these people, and you came to it at an early age. So early, I almost wonder if you didn't really have a choice in all of this stuff. Let's talk about this. You come from a political environment, shall we say?
I do. I grew up in Washington Heights. My mom ran for office in the city council when women just didn't run for office. The thing I saw when I was campaigning actively for her was we would go out and campaign and people would say to her, "Why aren't you at home with your husband?" And she'd say, "Well, I don't have a husband. I'm divorced." And then, "Why aren't you raising your 2 kids?" She says, "I'm trying, but they're a little wild. But this one's here with me, that's a good thing."
Right. I'm raising him right now.
But even before that, I started working for another cousin, a relative of mine, my cousin Bella Abzug, as a 12-year-old kid. And I spent my early days campaigning for Bella on the streets of Inwood and Washington Heights. And in my spare time, would go follow her to anti-war demonstrations, impeach Nixon demonstrations. So by the time I was 14, 15, I thought this is what everyone did, and realized as I got older that wasn't really the case.
Yeah, I hate to tell you about the fun that you missed out on, but it sounds like you were having a different kind of fun. I mean, a campaign is actually a very exciting environment, and Bella Abzug was a very exciting campaigner.
Yeah, it was an amazing time to hone my skills, and I just going down memory lane because I know you love this, and it always comes out in your podcast, but. I remember when I applied to the community board at the age of 16, and my mom was a city council member at the time. She said, "I can't appoint you to the community board. It's a terrible conflict of interest." I said, "Well, I'm not going to ask you." So I wrote a letter to Borough President Percy Sutton, and I remember being on the street with Percy Sutton and David Dinkins before he became mayor. And David Dinkins turned to me and said, "I think the borough president is going to make an announcement tomorrow." And then it turned out it was on the front page below the fold in the New York Times that Sutton had appointed 2 teenagers to the community board. So when people say to me, what about community-based planning? What about neighborhoods, having a say in development? I'm like, let me tell you something. I've gone to more community board meetings in my entire life than maybe anybody in New York City. City of 8 million people.
Actually, that literally might be true.
That might be true.
Yeah.
So I'm ready.
Jessica Ramos might be running a close second. She too got dragged into this. Her father was a member of Community Board 3 out in Queens.
Fair enough.
So you're in this environment. And this is actually going on. What's important with Bella Abzug and with your mom, frankly, is that they're pioneers. They're breaking barriers. And this is at the height, the white hot heat of the women's movement, right? I mean, so it's actually movement politics as well as the ordinary management of the city that you're being exposed to.
I mean, we have come such a long way. You look at AOC today and, her stunning victory and the work that people like the Congresswoman, the work that the things that she's accomplished. And so many people stand on the shoulders of my mom, of Bella, of Gloria Steinem, of Marianne Kripsack, who Gail Brewer will tell you. That's where I met Gail in the 1974 campaign for Marianne Kripsack for lieutenant governor, the first woman statewide candidate. And she wins.
Yeah.
And she wins.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning of equality and, diversity. And, in other parts of the city, you had Shirley Chisholm. You had, real trailblazers who are honored today. And now it's up to the next generation to form maybe a different path and a different set of issues. But that battle continues. And you know what I'm really amazed about? I was talking about this morning. It was really something to see the anti-Trump rally, at the library in Manhattan. And what struck me was the people coming up to me who I've known for 30 years, people now in their 80s, in wheelchairs and canes, who came out to fight Trump as if the battle had not ended. The same people who were the pioneers in the women's movement, in the anti-war movement, these same folks in their 80s and 90s were marching down Broadway. It was very emotional to me. I thought it was just amazing to see the young kids, right?
Yeah.
With these pioneers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. I think of that as a West Side phenomenon, right? I mean, you, Jerry Nadler, some of these folks who were known as the West Side Kids, when you were all a lot younger, we were all a lot younger, and we're just sort of intensively involved in politics in a way that, to me, it felt like the neighborhood had sort of delegated a lot of this to you, meaning there are a lot of issues going on downtown. A lot of people had a lot of feelings about the war, about the women's movement, about all kinds of different things. But the West Side kids or the West Side political structure, a couple of clubs, a couple of political leaders, you being one of them, would handle it, would always kind of be there.
So I'm second generation West Side kid,
yes.
And Jerry Nadler is sort of the still chairman of the board of that time period and the continuation of that. But what Jerry always believed in, and I've tried to follow both in terms of politics, but also in terms of my role in government, was always build the next generation. Your own longevity, right, is obviously what elected officials think about, but Jerry always understood that to continue that brand of liberalism and progressivism was about how we elevate the next generation. And so those of us around him really had opportunities to get involved and to elevate and then to eventually run for office. We continue that tradition on the West Side today with Michael Lash's election to the Assembly when we met him when he was 14 years old. I mean, it's that, again,
right.
Come in and do work and build community and be true to your ideals and beliefs. Learn and have experience so that when your moment comes, you're not walking into a legislative body or perhaps a mayoralty with training wheels. You're somebody who knows how to put your experience into action. And I think Jerry should get a lot of credit for that. And the people like him around the city who invested early in young leadership.
Okay, now let's talk some business. You are running for mayor. Affordability apparently is the number one issue. I've heard this over and over and over again from all of the candidates. Is that kind of where you're coming from as well?
I think that's one of the top issues that the city faces. And we need a mayor who's going to understand to understand how to put programs in place to give people the opportunity to stay and thrive in the city. First and foremost, it starts with affordable housing. I started as a Mitchell-Lama housing activist trying to save this middle-income housing. I have a plan to take those vacant lots that the city owns and turn those lots into the next generation of truly affordable housing so that we speak less about gentrification and more about building community. Think about those tenants who moved into public housing, Mitchell-Lama housing. They didn't just live in affordable housing units. they actually transformed neighborhoods. They went to communities that no one wanted to live in, and then they built the schools and the daycare centers. And we need more of that today. We need people who are centered on believing and staying in New York City. And I think affordability will get us there. But it's not just housing. It's also education. We need a daycare plan. We need to cut daycare costs by 50%. We need to baseline 3K and pre-K. And then I want to, and my kids are against this, but I want to extend the school day to 4:30 so that we can give kids the extra help they need. If we can do this and make education truly accessible and affordable and fair for everybody, this city will come back like nobody's business.
How do you cut the cost of daycare?
Well, our Tri-Share child care plan is basically saying to people, look, pay 7% of your income, no more than 7%. If you can't afford it, you don't have to pay it all. There are federal and state subsidies that are huge that we already deploy. And then I want to bring the business community in and say to them, look, come into this too. Put a percentage into the pot, because part of what we're finding with our big corporations, even the city workforce, if you can't retain your workforce because they can't afford to be here, your company suffers. So we need to partner in this. And I think we can get that done.
So that's not lowering the cost. That's maybe lowering the government's cost. Is that what you're getting at?
No, it's also pooling the three tiers of this, right? If you make your own contribution, you also have city and state federal investment, and then the business community picks up the rest of it. We ramp this up. It's not going to happen in a day. Right. We start to maybe cut childcare costs by 50%. That's maybe the difference between staying here or moving to mosquito-ridden Florida or moving to Texas or even New Jersey. Why would we let people leave? The job of the mayor is to go back to the compact, which is if you come here from all over the world, you will go to great universities. We will educate you. You will also be exposed to things that you can't find anywhere else. The cultural mecca of the world, the center of the universe, the most diverse city ever constructed. And we also have the greatest parks and playgrounds and streetscape. And that's the compact. In exchange for all of that, you stay here, you raise your family here, you pay your taxes here, you work in some of the greatest industries that New York is. Now we have a tech industry that's going to boom. The mayor has to shepherd that. And we've gotten away from that, Errol. We don't do the big things anymore. We don't do big events. We don't make this town exciting. Swagger is not hanging out in nightclubs. Swagger, to me, is governing well and getting the things needed to have a city that prospers. Yes, the cost of living here has spiraled. So let's put programs in place to get this done. And the one argument I would make to people, and this is based on my experience, is the shelf life of executives is getting shorter and shorter. We see that nationally with mayors and governors. It's just tough to maintain a favorability and a big stick, right? So you really have a couple of years if you're going to move your agenda. And that's why a mayor on training wheels doesn't work this time. We need someone who can come in on day one, build an administration, build capacity, and spend the next year or two getting this agenda moving.
Okay, so there's this guy named Cuomo who says, I've been governor for 11 years. I've got the experience, Scott Stringer. In fact, I've got more than you in some ways in executive functions. So what do you say to him?
Look, I say to Andrew that this is not a moment for chaos. This is a moment for cooperation. This is not a moment. He seems to bring the chaos everywhere he goes. I think people don't want that anymore. I don't think they want it with Adams. I don't think they want it with Cuomo. And I think the way he's running his campaign is exactly how he will govern. He will not be inclusive. He will not get into the streets. He will not do what mayors need to do if we're going to make real change in the city. So I think this is the wrong office for him. I respect his experience, but I also question, that record that was just very anti-New York City. He cut the MTA. He fired Byford, Train Daddy. He cut CUNY. He cut $2.5 billion of Medicaid funding. He hated the city so much. His whole focus in COVID was just upending the city through Bill de Blasio. And while de Blasio certainly didn't understand how to fight back, it was hurtful to the city. And then I just don't think you mismanage COVID. And in the midst of this pandemic, you write a $5 million book deal when my mother and so many others were dying from this. And I don't think this is his moment to be mayor of New York City.
How would you have handled the pandemic if you were mayor at the time?
Look, I think, I was there and worked with de Blasio. In fact, there was a moment when he called me up and he said, I want to borrow $5 billion to help the city. And I said to him, Mayor, you're the boss. I don't mean boss like Trump and Cuomo, so let me just not do that. You're our leader. Tell me what the financial plan is. And he said, well, I don't have a plan. I just think we should borrow the money. I said, well, if you borrow $5 billion, there's a $500 million debt service. So what are we getting for this? And I didn't let him do it because the comptroller had to sign off on it. He tried to do an end round to the state Senate. I followed him there. And so I tell you that story about COVID because in my role, I knew that someone had to be fiscally responsible and not simply play to the crowd. And that's what I tried to do as controller with COVID. And look, there were big decisions we all had to make. I remember being in my office, on that day that I became the first city official to shut down the controller's office. I remember sitting with our deputy controller saying, have we put the protections in place for the pension fund? Can we walk out and manage the pension fund? And we agreed after meeting with the staff that we could do that. And that saved lives of people I know. No one in our office got sick because we didn't understand what was coming. But we also were very responsible during that time period.
The other big issue that I see talked about a lot on the campaign trail is mental health. It's unfortunate to me that it too often gets pulled up as part of a conversation about public safety. There are a lot of different reasons that, you need to help sick people get well. Public safety, I think, confuses the issue quite a bit. But tell me what your thinking is about that.
Look, Cuomo put a lot of folks on the street and cut a lot of beds, did a lot of bad things for people who were very vulnerable. And I think we're still paying the price for that. But I think it's okay to talk about public safety and mental health because I don't think it's either or, right? When I take my sons into the subways and I look around and see people living out of shopping bags or sleeping literally on the trains. I know, because I'm a kid from Washington Heights, grew up here, back in the day. I know they're no danger to anybody but themselves, and somebody has to help. And I really liked when Eric Adams said in his campaign, I'm going to align policing and mental health, because in some ways it can be very positive to go together, to make sure that we protect people and that we also help people and we also protect mental health workers. And none of those programs were realized. And I think I am qualified to operationalize a mental health program, working with our 11 public hospitals, making sure that we're not just picking people off the streets, off the streets, or worse, taking people out of the subways, dumping them on the streets, or putting them in a hospital for 48 hours. Why do we still do that? People come out in 48 hours. They're back in the streets. They're back at Grand Central. They're back at Penn Station. They're back in front of the church or the shul. And we need to have a plan to track them and help them. Some need medication. Many need supportive housing. So we have to align all of these issues and align the legislature and the governor to get the thousands of people. It's not hundreds of thousands, but it is thousands of people who need this help. But I do think it's having agencies working collaboratively and together. It cannot just be mental health in the mental health lane. And I also think if you really want to extend this, and I see this in the public school system, there's a lot of kids who didn't have iPads, who were stuck in their homes because their parents were afraid to death that their kids would somehow get COVID. We didn't really have any understanding of the science, that our kids were actually pretty safe, but we didn't know that at the time. And we have a whole generation of children who literally lost a year out of the most important moment in their lives. We are not addressing mental health in the schools. We're not doing preventative work. And we're not identifying the signs of mental health or physical issues early in a child's life.
So January 1st, if you're mayor, what do you do about that?
We're going to realign the Department of Education. We're going to take that $41 billion budget. We're going to break it down, clarion call for mental health initiatives in every single public school. Has to happen on day one. We have to also empower City Hall. Number one agenda is to build out a mental health workforce that could be out in the streets, but also using different government agencies, break down those silos to make sure that we're actually tracking the people who need services and then get them into services. Here's the reality of what we're facing. We have a broken city government. We have agencies that have been hollowed out. So the expertise and the capacity has waned in a very significant way. The next mayor has to immediately build back the government infrastructure. A lot of people, and I've worked on this issue, talk about how we have to deploy our not-for-profits. We have to change the procurement process here. I fought for procurement reform when I was controller, but if we're not paying our not-for-profits, if we're not working with them, then that coordination is not going to get to, lack of coordination is not going to solve this problem. And people forget, city agencies really don't do direct services, right? We really have an array of social services. Mm-hmm. And overlay that with Trump coming in and actually looking at our budget codes and trying to collapse that safety net, the next mayor is going to have to multitask. And that's why a mayoralty on training wheels is probably not what we need today, but we need someone who is a grizzled, professional government official to deal with this. Let me tell you, when they say this at the debates that, I'm not a politician, I'm not a career elected official, I always raise my hand and say, well, I am, as you know. But then I say, why would you, in a moment of crisis, why would you hire the plastic surgeon from the Hamptons as opposed to the heart specialist that's around the corner? Right. That's the issue.
Right. No, that's interesting. You said mayoralty on training wheels, I think 3 times now. Who are you talking about when you say that?
Well, I'm not talking about anyone specifically, except I think that that's what distinguishes me in this race. I have 30 years of government service, state legislative experience. It's real. I was a reformer in Albany, as you mentioned. As borough president, I worked on land use issues and affordable housing issues, built affordable housing, worked with communities. Very successful tenure as borough president and as controller. When you're the chief fiscal officer for 8 years, you've probably seen enough to know what you're facing on January 2026 when you take office. I think that is a legitimate issue. Now, I think what I have to show New Yorkers is, what am I going to do with that experience? Experience only matters if you have an action plan. And as we roll out our substantive policy, as I always have in any campaign I've run, whether it's our affordable housing plan, our education plan, I think as people see what's possible, I think we have a very good chance to be the Democratic nominee.
Let's talk about character. We have a mayor who was arrested, and charged with very serious crimes. The case went away. We don't need to belabor any of that. But, when we bring up the issues that led the ex-governor to resign 4 years ago, more trouble. Look, I feel like I shouldn't have to ask, but I am asking candidates, are you an honest person? Are you, does it matter? Is it something that you want to sort of address proactively, as opposed to just kind of assuming that, well, I haven't been charged, so everybody needs to just leave me alone?
Look, I'm in this for the right reason. It's my life's work. It's work for decades. And when you look at the totality of the situations I've been in,
yeah, when you were in Albany, it was a viper's nest. It was a pretty crazy place. And say a little bit about empty seat voting, which you sort of pushed to end, which was
yeah. Well, look. First of all, I think my honesty speaks for itself in a 30-year government career. And look, and you know this, Errol, when you got kids, what's the best thing you leave them with, right? It's your reputation. It's they're going to look you up when they're young, right? They're going to Google everything. They're going to see everything about you, as I did with my parents. Although we didn't Google in those days, you had to go through papers. But so for me, it's also personal. Like I want my kids to say that I want to follow in Dad's footsteps, right? But in terms of that, I think honesty does play a role in government. And empty seat voting in Albany was,
You could come in the morning, check in, and like
swipe a card.
Go play golf for the rest of the day, literally. And votes would be cast as if you had been sitting in the chamber.
The Brennan Center for Justice put out a report that said our legislature was the number one dysfunctional legislature, or number two in the country. And they came to me with rules reform, including empty seat voting. And I had a reputation of being a reformer in Albany. I was certainly one of the most liberal members. Voted no on weakening the rent laws, all the things that people take for granted today. But I was there as a lone voice. And I decided to introduce the rules reform. One, I believed in it, but two, I could withstand the establishment attack. I had an Upper West Side district that would reward this. I knew that the editorial boards like the Times and Post and Daily News would support this. And I also had the strength to withstand the incoming. And we got it done. We ended empty seat voting, and we had a number of other rules reforms implemented. It was the first rules reform, I think, since Lincoln. I'm exaggerating, but it was at the time, it was a very important moment for the legislature. And I was proud to lead it. And sometimes you got to step up.
You know, when I first met you back in the 1980s, you and Charlie King were running a bar on the West Side. And I don't remember. I remember drinking a lot. I don't remember paying a lot, which may have contributed to the demise of the establishment. I remember reading many years later that it was also a restaurant. I was like, they had food there. Nobody ever tried to sell me any food.
Charlie and I didn't. We went on to do better things, but I guess we were always secretly wanting a career in politics. So people like you come in. Come on, it's on.
On the house.
Yeah, it's on the house. We knew Errol would be the star of New York one someday.
No, I thought back then I was going to be a politician.
Even better. We were thinking about a citywide race endorsement. No, I don't know.
So I mean, I only bring that up because we've talked about how you've been a career public servant, but you have tried some other things. I guess I want to end on asking you about the economy as a whole, because one thing that the mayor has to do, and you sort of touched on it before, is that we have major industries that are here. The cultural industries, the philanthropic organizations, certainly Wall Street, the tech sector. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And there's a need for a mayor who knows how to manage that, not to simply give it away, not to be steamrolled, not to be bamboozled, but also not to try and tax it out of existence, right? I mean, that sector is looking for somebody to work with. You're putting yourself forward as somebody who can do that.
Well, look, you mentioned talk about small business experience. We ask our small businesses to do a lot of things in the name of workers' rights, in the name of justice and fair wages, and I support every one of those initiatives. But at some point, you have to also step in and say, if we're asking a small business to do X, we also have to alleviate the back end called Y. So it's really an XY to me. Help us help the workers, but let us help you. And we do need to have offsets if we're going to keep our small businesses thriving. Look, one of the things that I feel strongly about, and I worked on this as comptroller, was the notion that we have women and minority-owned businesses that get certified as MWBEs, but they get no contracts, no work. And the reason we want them to have an opportunity to compete fairly for city contracts is because those small businesses are very often not in the central part of Manhattan, but actually in Brooklyn and Queens, in diverse communities. So those businesses hire locally, hire diversity. When I was comptroller, I letter graded every single agency.
Including your own, I remember that.
Including my own, and said, so we certify MWBs, let's have a parade, but no agencies are giving contracts. And I remember a young African-American woman at one of my roundtables saying to me, Scott, I have a contract. I'm a publicist for Nike, which is a very big deal for someone of my generation. And yet I can't get a contract from the Department of Education. And she said, I want to tell you why that's important. Because when you get a city contract, you've gone through all the vetting, the investigations, the DOI. She said, that means I can compete anywhere in the world. And that's why I letter graded the agencies. A's and B's, but mostly C's and D's. I gave the controller's office a C. Took me 3 years to get a spend with a diverse group of vendors. It's hard work, Errol. That's why I appointed the city's first chief diversity officer, Carol Wallace. Never been done before. And I did this work because I recognized that when we think about the economy, we have to, yes, think about the tech companies and the big giants that we want to keep them coming here and staying here. We don't want them in Florida. But, there's an economy that's worth billions if we own it. Unfortunately, when I left the controller's office, that initiative fell apart. But I will bring it back with the next controller and with the mayor. And I'm going to ask the next controller, no, you letter grade my agencies. Give me a week's notice before you do it. But I need you to hold our people accountable because the economy, that economy matters to us.
I've seen you on the campaign trail, I guess it's anecdotal, but sort of saying, hey, rank me as your number 2 choice. What's your strategy for winning? How does that play into all of this?
I don't really mean that. No. Look, I think all the candidates on the stage know that at some point there is going to be ranking decisions that the voters have to make. And I see it in the streets now. People used to say, hey, I'm voting for you. Now people say, well, you're in my rank. And I say to them, well, I got to move you up a little, right? And that's this new way of voting and strategizing. But I would say this, I'm not over-strategizing the strategy. I'm asking people to vote for me because I think people are buying what I'm selling. And then down the line, and I know it sounds down the line like the election's tomorrow, but take it from me, 7 weeks is an eternity. 5 things are going to happen in this race that you and I have no idea. And I do think, when I say rank second, it's also a nod to the people in the room who are trying to sort out, some very good candidates.
Okay. We've talked, I think it's been beaten to death, but it is worth mentioning back in 2013, you were part of a very contentious race against another ex-governor who had resigned, and it was Eliot Spitzer versus Scott Stringer. I remember moderating a debate, one of the wildest ones I've ever been involved in. You two really went at it. I think it's online. People should go and check that out. It really was something. It was me and Brian Lehrer. I remember he looked at me, I looked at him. We just kind of sat, and you guys just went at it. We didn't, no rules. It was kind of like a freestyle.
It was the modern day Lincoln Douglas, man.
It was pretty wild. It was actually a great debate. I mean, because, we set up all of these rules, but the rules are just to encourage an exchange. And you guys just decided you wanted to exchange, and you just went at it.
Well, can I tell you something? Shout out to Eliot Spitzer, because here's a guy who, like Cuomo, had huge name recognition, jumped out to a huge lead, had commercials, $1 million commercials.
Personally rich. He had all the money.
He had all the money. But you know what? He understood that you got to engage in New York. And he went after me right back. And he never thought he was better than I was. Even when he was 20 points ahead, he treated me with respect as a worthy opponent. He obviously thought he would do a better job. We had disagreements. But that's democracy. That's why the Campaign Finance Board has you doing debates, because this is how we pick a mayor. This is how we pick our candidates. And I think Andrew Cuomo's making a very foolish decision to think that because of his name recognition and because of some polls, mostly the ones he's involved with, or the people who are involved with, some of these polls are so silly. It's not good. New Yorkers are so much smarter than this. I just think it's a colossal failure. But look, to the point, I was 20 points behind with 3 weeks to go. People came to my house the day the Spitzer announced, and they brought food. I said, what's this? It was like a shiver, right? like the whole thing, it was over. Like,
people with black veils on,
10 o'clock at night, when I do my book, this is going to be great chapters. But we fought back. So when people say to me, how are you going to win this race? Like, I see it. I know.
What happened in that? I remember seeing you during that campaign, and everybody people were treating you with pity and, and horror at what was about to happen. And you just kind of, just went through what a candidate is supposed to do. You just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. When did you know that it wasn't what people thought it was going to be, which they thought it was going to be a massacre of Scott Stringer?
So, truthfully, I mean, it looked like it was going to be like the ultimate massacre. I think we did very well in the debates. We were very underestimated. I really knew the office because I had prepared to run for it. But look, I will tell you, because you get everything out of me. The last week of the campaign, Quinnipiac, it was basically dead even, but there were a couple of polls on the weekend that showed me 2 points behind, which usually means, this is not ranked choice, it usually means you're probably falling short. So I said to my wife, look, I think we came very close. I will get a job when this is over. But I don't think I'm going to win. And it was, obviously very upsetting, but I had to tell her it was Sunday night. On Monday, I'm off to a senior center. Audrey Gelman, my former press secretary, gets a call from Bob Hart. I don't know if you know him from New York One. They got the Quinnipiac poll just came out. We're up by 7. And I'm like, oh, that's it. We did it. We really did it. Huh. And I said, oh my God, I got to call Elise and tell her, because I left her. She's like, okay, stop. We'll talk about this on Tuesday. I don't want to hear any more about polls. Goodbye. And that was it. But it was a wonderful campaign. It was a great coalition. And these candidates for mayor who think they're ahead, they all make the same mistake. Yang was going to be mayor. Quinn was going to be mayor.
Weiner was in the lead for a while in 2013.
Weiner was going to be mayor. They're all going to be mayor. But the voters have a different path. They will figure out what they want. If they want what I'm selling, I'm going to win the primary. If they want something different, then I won't. But it plays out starting now. And I'm just going to speak my truth and see where this goes. I said to my son, Miles, this is my last campaign. He said, because it's his last campaign. The family's ready to go. And keep in mind, we have millions of dollars to go on television. We've raised this money, $250 at a time. And so I'm excited about this.
Okay, sounds good. And ladies and gentlemen, as we say, the title of the podcast is You Decide. Thanks a whole lot for coming by. Good luck. We'll see you out there.
Thank you, sir.
Do you want more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of New York City and beyond? Check out our New York One podcast channel in the description. And hit subscribe to let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues.